Okay, so I just want to talk about basically getting what's called a proxy mesh or a sushi rig mesh. I think in rigging you've started talking a bit about this. So when you have a character with complex layers, I will mention this, you want to basically be able to dynamesh the layers together. And if you have any gaps, like we see a gap here between, let's say, knee pad and leg, that can cause problems. So what I do recommend you do is if you have clothing that is not like sort of attached to this, because we want to make a solid single shell essentially out of this and then slice it up. So what I'll often do is go to subtool, go to merge all or merge visible. In this case, everything is visible, so we'll go merge visible. I'm just going to talk briefly about the technique of ensuring that things are sort of stuck together or welded together. Okay. So in this case of the shirt, we can try to isolate it. If it has a thickness, which I'm not sure it does, it doesn't have a thickness. So what that basically means is, or does it? I'm actually a little confused as to that. I think it actually does have a thickness because we can see inside it. Usually if it was single-sided, we wouldn't be able to see it. So what I'll do is I'll unhide that. So we can actually try to take this and go to inflate. Deformation, and we can do this with visibility on, which can help. So in order to quickly mask subtools, and usually your individual subtools when they've been merged together will remain as one solid subtool. If they have splits in them, you can try to go to subtool organization and say auto group, which will auto rearrange them, because some meshes have different polygroups from dynameshing or from whatever else. Anyways, I'm going to control click on this with the move scale rotate tool, the transpose tool visible. I'm going to flip the mask around so that should make sure, yeah, just that is visible. And then you can do just the subtle inflate. So again, we just want to make sure we have like solid contact, okay, between body and mesh, because I'll show you what happens when we have gaps if we're just going to dynamesh this thing together. So let's go to dynamesh here, dynamesh. You may get some kind of blobs or like undercuts or weird cavities like we have in here. So if I were to melt this away, you see there's like some deep cavities in there. Now we're not looking for animation perfect mesh. We're looking for volumes. So again, you can either go in with that, like isolating individual subtools, or just the, let's say, the inflate brush and kind of hit certain areas if you want, just to kind of plug up any gaps. Okay, so that's useful. By the way, this case, this character I'm using is just a test case. It's far from perfect. It's not in T-pose. The legs are too close together. There's a lot of little issues there with this thing. But anyways, if you were to dynamesh even at a bit of a higher resolution, with inflating those areas closed, right, we should avoid any kind of hidden cavities. I still have one here in the legs, okay, or in the knees, I should say. But everything else, like if you were to sort of smooth it out, should for the most part be simple mesh. Now, I'll sort of just deal with a generic kind of body, so we can talk about that and the process for this. It's really just polygrouping the mesh. So even though you have your high-res mesh, most likely it isn't a clean mesh like this, okay? Again, I'm going to just isolate this thing and just rotate the arms into roughly T-pose here. Just smooth this out. Okay, and our hands should be flat too. So you want to imagine basically the legs should be bent at the knees, okay? Slight bend at the knees. So in this case, by the way, there's a really handy trick for masking, like the full length of the arms or legs. If you have the move scale rotate tool active and you hold control, you can actually kind of mask very quickly into kind of the length of a joint. So holding control and dragging with move scale rotate transpose, as it's called, can help a lot. And I'm going to just give this thing a slight bend here. Okay. Clear the mask, and then again I'll just smooth out a little bit. And then again, holding control and using the move scale rotate tool, get roughly down to mid-knee. Usually I'll switch back to a regular brush, which is Q, and then control click a few times so we get a bit of a just like a blend on that. So we want a slight bend in the legs Again, I'll move the pivot to roughly where the joint of the knee is and give it that slight bend there, okay? And again, I think it has it in the arms. The hand should be flat, but in this case, I don't want to go through and bore you by, masking and kind of making sure everything's, kind of done perfectly here. But basically, yes, you want this in line and on an imaginary flat plane across the front view, basically, okay? So you'd have to do all the fingers. But yeah, we'll imagine there's like clothing and stuff already merged into this and Dynamesh together. So usually my process at this point, if I'm going to do what's called a quick proxy mesh, sushi rig mesh, basically meaning that we have the general volume. So oftentimes in production what happens is modeling gets started, and then maybe 2 to 4 weeks, maybe 2 months down the line, rigging comes along, and they start developing the rig. And usually I would say, not always, but usually in production, the general shape of the character, the general shape of what that mesh is going to look like is set for the most part. So once you're, as the modeler is working on smaller and smaller details and then remeshing and doing other stuff, you can actually send a rough split segmented version of this model off to rigging to literally just parent. And that may last all the way through the end of production, so that when you're in Maya, instead of having a fully skinned mesh in your viewport, you're going to have this kind of split mesh that's just parented with no skinning. And so the animation will work really, really fast and really efficiently. And then you just turn on the real mesh that's skinned properly with textures and everything, and that goes on only at render time or only when you export to Unreal. So it just speeds up the animation workflow and also allows more than one team to kind of get started on this thing, okay? So for me, I'm going to just Dynamesh this thing, and usually because it's going to be a very kind of rough production model, I usually Dynamesh my poly count lower. So if your model is, some people are at 5-6 million, and that's totally fine. I'll usually Dynamesh down to 500,000, 250,000 polys. So if that weren't the case, then I would do it in this case. The other thing you have to be careful of is your fingers should also be spread apart, because if you're Dynameshing low or too low, you might lose some detail, right? It might blend some fingers together. So also make sure the fingers are spread apart, okay? So the next step is, again, I hope pretty straightforward. I'm basically going to use the slice brush, and you can do this one of 3 ways, by either using select lasso or select rectangle. And essentially we want to create a polygroup everywhere where this thing is going to have a joint. So if I hold Control Shift now, I'm going to make sure I'm on select lasso. So one way is to, let's say, isolate the arms, okay, and hit Control W. That creates a polygroup, right? Split at the elbows. Control W, okay? That's method 1. Another method is to, and again, it's always the same shortcut to create a new polygroup, Control W. Okay, so let's say I want to go right to the wrist here. I'm going to mask right, and again, I want a good loop around the wrist here. Oops. So I'm just going to focus on that. So Control W, and that makes a new group, right? So whether something's masked or left visible, that's a way to create a group. Another way, which I really like, is to go to Slice Curve, and then I can simply go through and slice. So usually we kind of split off the head and neck from the rest of the body, mainly because there's some other layer of clothing, and so a natural split line is where the head meets, or the neck and shoulders meet clothing. And mainly that just makes things efficient. So when you do blend shapes, you're literally re-sculpting and having a layer, not with different topology, but with clean topology down the road. So yeah, in this case, the guy doesn't have clothing, so I'm going to just kind of slice through. By the way, slice does not work in symmetry, so this is a bit of a tricky thing. But also, if I try to slice through here, you see it just goes right through the mesh if I'm trying to do, let's say, little finger joints. So what I'll often do is kind of do some masking to protect areas that I don't want to get sliced. Okay. And then I'll remesh down the road. Now in this case where it's a lopsided, right? If the mesh is basically symmetrical, you can get away with doing, mirror and weld, I should say. Mesh editing, mirror and weld. So then you get a more symmetrical piece that way. Usually for the torso, we're typically splitting the body into between 3 and 5 segments. So it could be 3, it could be 4, it could be 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. So yeah, I might make these a little bit smaller. So that will represent the number of spine bones in your character, okay? And then for the legs here, we're basically going to do kind of a tighty-whitey situation. All right, so again, I'm using curve, but I know I can kind of symmetry this. If you couldn't symmetry this, then I would recommend using either, masking, right? You can do Control W, which again works symmetrically, or visibility, which is, again, using usually select lasso. Okay, so again, if you're stuck with an asymmetrical mesh, but you still mostly have symmetry throughout, then you can do it this way, where you just isolate and do Control W. So again, same thing here. So again, the three techniques all work basically the same. They don't really have much of a change. I usually turn off perspective for this too, especially in a side view or top view. We want to go across the ankle there. Now you can go more level with this too, so I'll maybe do it a little more level there. Control W. And for the head, you can put a second, maybe 2 or 3 divisions through the neck. In this case, I can use slice because there's no other mesh that's going to basically get chopped, and I'm keeping it nice and level, so it's going to go cleanly through. So you can kind of have like 2 segments there, because you might have 2 bone segments for the neck, okay, for twisting, turning, that kind of thing. Now for the feet, again, typically we don't have characters with toes, and I don't really recommend having characters with full-fledged toes, even if they have like sandals on. Kind of make it a more approximate shape. And deal with it in texturing. And again, I'll do a slice curve here. So you want to go through the ball of the foot, okay? And by the way, your feet and everything should be shoulder width apart. And if they're rotated out, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do recommend, basically just getting them to turn more sort of straight inward, meaning that I'll click on the heel here, Alt-click on the heel, and then I can kind of turn these more straight facing, just because it'll be easier for the rigging process to have that simple, straighter orientation, okay? Oops, I left something masked or unmasked there, yeah. There we go. Okay, so yeah, polygrips for the bottom of the feet. Again, I'll just do mirror and weld here. Okay, so again, to do the fingers, it's sort of the same process. And one of the things too that's really, really challenging, and sometimes I find I have to basically redo the hands, or actually have the mesh for the hands be separate and isolated, is to, so I'm just going to do the next round of joints here, and I'll show you what I'll do after this. Let's do a lasso in this case, select lasso. So using the lasso too is really, really fast, which is nice. Control W. So I'm basically just going to isolate this and then get down to the kind of bare knuckle here. Okay. So I'll turn up Dynamesh, go to Z-Remesh. We can turn on keep groups, but smoothing will potentially evaporate these fingers. So we'll try it. I'll just kind of chop the topology down in half, and we'll see. Yeah, you see they get like crazy skeletal. So I'll usually turn down this option, either quite low or just to off. And like I said, sometimes I have different mesh, right? So I can just go back and inflate this too, by the way. So I can just go back to inflate. Or if you have, usually you should keep your original mesh somewhere so you can kind of project back the detail, let's say, or the volume. Is another way to put it. But yeah, for the most part, this will give you kind of like pretty decent areas of mesh. Let's keep it the same and Z-Remesh again. Yeah, the fingers are always a bit of a challenge, like I said, because that smoothing can really change the shape dramatically. So, but I do like it for kind of cleaning simpler, sleeker groups for the rest of the mesh here. Okay. So yeah, sometimes you will have to split up the hands and arms, or replace them. Like I've got generic hands that I use on a lot of stuff, so or you just project back the detail. But for the most part, you see you've got the right groups. I think there's a slight error here. I've actually got, yeah, like a little missing group here. I'll show you how to fix this too. Quick way to fix this is to use the Move, Scale, Rotate tool and Control click on the polygroup that's got a bit of an error. And then I'm going to invert that by Control clicking off the model and just painting in. I'll just go back to freehand here. Just making sure I paint in the rest and hit Control W, and that should give me a proper group there. Okay. So again, the face, you know, it's going to lose a ton of detail. That is okay. The next part of this, which I will show you, is great for the rigging process, because what I'm going to do is go to, let's see, I should actually have these be separate groups first. So I'm going to go through and just do an auto group. So that means the left side and the right side will have their own distinctive groups. I'm going to do it until we see different colors there. So anything that's kind of symmetrically grouped, I'm going to make it asymmetrically grouped by just hitting auto group. So again, usually the arms, the legs, auto group. Again, it might be hard to see, but technically these are two different colors. So if I auto group again, usually I auto group till they're different enough. There. Oop. Okay, so that's good. Same thing here, auto group. Same thing here, auto group. Auto group. What's nice too about the little finger digits is, are these the same? Yeah, these are different now. The hands, auto group. And actually if we, yeah, let's just hide off all this stuff. So I'm Control Shift clicking, by the way. Or you can, make sure I go back to select lasso, Control Shift Alt, and you can quickly hide stuff there. So if you skip joints, let's say like this, okay? And are they done that way there? Okay, perfect. I'll go to auto group. So now each and every little digit is its own group, okay? And then I'll re-isolate this one because they're all the same still. That's the last one left. I'll go to auto group. So now they're all unique. The reason why I'm going to do this, I'll show you, is that I'm going to go to split, group split. Okay, so what this is going to do is literally split each and every subtool into its own particular piece of geometry, okay? If we can see it, the digits are super, super small, but let's, yeah, go down to like the hands. Okay, thumb, there's some other thumb stuff. Torso, okay, all this stuff is split, okay? Now, I should have renamed this stuff beforehand, but for the sake of convenience, I'm just going to say there's Go Z. So you can actually Go Z. Go Z is only going to send the active subtool. In this case, I want to Go Z all subtools. It'll take a second. Okay, so as I said, you know, unfortunately, these things are not named properly, but we have renaming tools in Maya we can use. What's great about this, though, that I will show you is, as soon as Maya catches up here, I can now start to do kind of like my rigging process or proxy rigging. So this is my Sushi mesh, right? Because I split it in ZBrush based on groups, I can now have these set up so that I can go in. I'm going to just go to, let's say, a left view. I'm not by any means a rigging artist, but I'll go to rigging, skeleton, create joints, click once for the hip, once for the knee, once at the ankle, and then hit W. So there's our IK chain. Go to a front view. And I'll just select this again, move this over, and we can kind of rotate this into position. We hit 4 here, so get the hip in the right position. So this is why it's important to keep the legs in line but bent at the knee. What I mean by in line is that the shin from a front view or back view isn't swinging to the left or right. If that happens, that basically means your knee's broken, right? So it's the same thing with the arm. You can bend in one axis only at the elbow. So you want to make sure the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist, and all the joints of the finger are basically flat on one plane. I didn't bother doing it for time's sake, but there they are. And as I was mentioning before, if let me just find these joints here. So I'm going to go to, where are they in the list? So I'll rename this, whatever it is. Usually it's like character name underscore. This will be right because it's the character's right. R up leg. Okay, so it's good to kind of rename these. And it might be actually character mesh or mesh character. Because you'll have maybe this name for the actual leg bone later on. So it's a good idea to kind of start naming things logically too. Okay, so this is up here. Lower leg, so just type in LO for low, that's fine. Okay, so I'm just going to move this stuff down. I want to find where my joints are. So I'm going to just reorganize them in the list here by middle mouse clicking and dragging. And here's oops. Yeah, that should not be under there. Okay. Expand your joint. So I think I want to link the upper leg to joint 1. If you middle mouse click and drag, you're basically parenting it to that joint. So now what will happen is if I take the joint here and rotate, you see it follows, right? If I take the lower leg. So again, I'm not skinning, I'm basically just parenting. So I'm going to parent to joint 2, right? So now that'll follow that. Okay, let's make sure I'm rotating the right thing here. There, so now the whole leg follows. And if I hide those, let's say I hide these 2 pieces of mesh. Oops. Right. Let me just select my joint chain, isolate for a second. You can also go to skeleton, create IK handle. So you want to click on joint 1, click on the last joint, and then you have this thing which drives the leg, basically. Okay. So if I unhide, right now, this is kind of what the proxy rig is going to look like. Okay, so now you get this idea of where the volumes are basically moving. Okay, and you can actually start animating as you're still developing the model, as long as the overall volume is roughly the same. Okay, so that is the advantage of kind of working through your concept phase and then knocking out this kind of sushi rig. So the same thing would apply. You know, I'm not going to build a skeleton or anything else, but you know, you could link these to the 5 segments if that's what you're planning for. Usually in cartoony characters, you can get away with less, like 3 or 4 spine joints. You know, we could do the same thing with the arm as well. Yeah, there's another question too that sometimes comes up is like, what part should be separate? So eyeballs, separate. Eyelids, sometimes optionally separate. Yeah, eyeballs. Sometimes eyelids, if the character is really cartoony, and the eyelids can just be like half spheres rotating, basically, that's okay. What else? Usually any kind of head hair. So hair, eyebrows, eyelashes, if they're more cartoony, can be sculpted in, but that would be for the next phase when we do our low res mesh. That can be kind of like an extrusion of the upper eyelid, essentially, or upper and lower eyelid. Sometimes people just use like a plane of polys that is curved to fit the eyelid shape for upper and lower, and then they paint them, or they have a texture and an alpha. So there's a few options there. Yeah, so when to break up the mesh too, I mean, I think if the character, for low poly production, if the character has like a skirt or something, or a dress, or a cape, anything that's kind of long and flowy, that can still probably be kept separate. Or usually I would have like overlapping, you know, if there's a full dress on the character, then I would probably have, like if the dress goes down to the ankles, I would cut the legs off maybe mid-shin and not even have shins under there. You know, unless you're doing cloth sim, which in your case is probably not the case. But yeah, if you're doing any kind of sim, or maybe you want it as a reference for like tweaking that, then you can keep the legs, but it does complicate things and make the the process longer. A lot of times you just kind of rough in the leg bones for a skirt, especially if it's a long skirt, and then you just skin them as if the legs were there, but through this like cylinder that would be the dress, let's say.